Reading B2 for Teens. Number 9. The history of graffiti. The first drawings on walls appeared in caves thousands of years ago. Later, the ancient Romans and Greeks wrote their names and protest poems on buildings. Modern graffiti seems to have appeared in Philadelphia in the early 1960s, and by the late 60s it had reached New York. The new art form really took off in the 1970s, when people began writing their names, or tags, on buildings all over the city. In the mid-70s, it was sometimes hard to see out of a subway car window, because the trains were completely covered in spray paintings known as masterpieces. In the early days, the taggers were part of street gangs, who were concerned with marking their territory. They worked in groups called crews, and called what they did writing. The term graffiti was first used by the New York Times and the novelist Norman Mailer. Art galleries in New York began buying graffiti in the early 70s. But at the same time that it began to be regarded as an art form, John Lindsay, the then mayor of New York, declared the first war on graffiti. By the 1980s, it became much harder to write on subway trains without being caught, and instead many of the more established graffiti artists began using roofs of buildings or canvases. The debate over whether graffiti is art or vandalism is still going on. Peter Vallone, a New York City councilor, thinks that graffiti done with permission can be art, but if it is on someone else's property it becomes a crime. "I have a message for the graffiti vandals out there," he said recently. "Your freedom of expression ends where my property begins." On the other hand, Felix, a member of the Berlin-based group Reclaim Your City, says that artists are reclaiming cities for the public from advertisers, and that graffiti represents freedom and makes cities more vibrant. For decades, graffiti has been a springboard to international fame for a few. Jean-Michel Basquiat began spraying on the street in the 1970s, before becoming a respected artist in the 80s. The Frenchman Blek Le Rat and the British artist Banksy have achieved international fame by producing complex works with stencils, often making political or humorous points. Works by Banksy have been sold for over £100,000. Graffiti is now sometimes big business.